may shock you. It might even horrify you. So if any of you feel that you do not care to subject your nerves to such a strain, now is your chance to, well, we've warned you.
Ow! What big eyes you have, the kind of eyes that drive most mad. So just to see that you don't get chased, I think I ought to walk with you for a ways. What full lips you have, they sure look somewhat bad. So until you get to Grandma's place, I think you ought to walk with me and be safe.
Dylan, it is another night. It's late at night. It's almost so late at night that the date's going to change in my time zone, not in yours. Time is insane. Dylan, it's Commentaries of the Night. Day 7. Night 7? Who knows? Super DM 64. Dylan McCandless, he's here.
Ready to commentate.
That is what the series is named after. So, what are we going to be rambling nonsensically and insanely over for well over an hour?
Well, we have left the 30s behind and jumped ahead to the 1940s with 1940... Fuck, I had this written down. 1941's The Wolfman, starring Lon Chaney Jr., the son of, well, Lon Chaney Sr., obviously.
I love how you said, "Oh, I wrote it down." It's in the title of because we're both streaming this, so it's in the title of the video we're both watching.
Oh, yeah, well, I've got it at full screen. I'm not looking at the thing. You know what I mean.
I see. So yeah, The Wolfman from 1941 in the 40s. The 30s is considered the golden age. We're skipping around a little bit because, like we said at the start, we're sort of doing the iconic first, really classics of the Universal classic monsters. And The Wolfman definitely fits into that crowd, despite all the other stuff that's worth discussing, but we're not going to discuss now, that came out between this and Bride. But
Indeed.
This film definitely feels closely related to them, certainly aesthetically, in the sense of timelessness in the setting. But also they had been trying to make a good popular werewolf movie for years. They had such great success with The Mummy and Dracula and Frankenstein and The Invisible Man that they thought that werewolves were just a natural place for them to go. But they never really got it off the ground, and when they finally tried with Werewolf of London, it didn't really stick because they were sort of unsure of how to approach the concept. So in 1941, they finally got around to doing this, and they finally had a hit. And it's, like I said, the one that went on to become one of the classics. So how do you feel about it going into it this time, since we are going to be watching it ourselves once again and commentating on it?
I think it's well deserved. I think it's a really good film. I for one really enjoy Werewolf of London. By the way, I like it because it's pre this movie, and this movie sort of writes a lot of the rules that we now know concerning not just werewolf movies, but like lore in general. And so I think Werewolf of London being before all that and getting to just sort of be its own thing, unfettered by what had come before, I personally enjoyed a lot. But this is definitely better than that movie, and I can understand why this is the one that became the phenomenon as opposed to that one.
Werewolf of London established the full moon thing, and this doesn't even really have the full moon thing specifically. It just has the moon as a general trigger for the transformation. But we'll talk about all of that. This is a big one from my childhood. Love the Wolfman. This character captured my imagination when I was a kid. I've always loved monsters, and monsters that, are men who become the monsters, or particularly things that have always fascinated me. I've always been a big fan of the Hulk, just Ghost Rider, stuff like that always interests me. And the Wolfman was one of my favorites. And werewolf stories in general have always been my particular favorite of the classic monster wheelhouse, of the regime of classic monsters. I'm like, give me the werewolves and nothing else. No, not necessarily, but they've always been my favorite. They've always been my favorite.
Why, you once even made one, didn't you?
I did indeed, and this film was a big inspiration for that in my approach to it. Rewatched it when I wrote it, and the approach to the lore and the approach to the reaction of the individual becoming the werewolf was what inspired me, and went on to inspire many other filmmakers, as we'll get into more detail in the actual commentary. But John Landis, of course, Joe Dante, many other filmmakers who went on to do their own werewolf stories, heavily inspired by this one. So,
yeah, it's interesting. I think both of the movies that probably inspired you the most when you made that one, are being covered by us this October, because by the time this video goes up, we will have already done our DFOS episode on American Werewolf in London.
Right.
Not to be confused with Werewolf of London.
Right.
And I think this and that are probably the two that influenced you the most.
Yeah.
From what I saw, just knowing you personally.
Without a doubt. And American Werewolf in London is sort of a remake of this by also making this movie a fictional part of its world,
Mm.
So that's what I find interesting about that movie. We'll talk about that when we do our review of that on DFOS, which probably has already come out. So, go listen to that. But we're going to be talking about The Wolfman tonight. There are some things that bug me about this one going back to it now. I rewatched it fairly recently, and there were some things where I was like, oh, I didn't like sitting through that as much as I used to. So we'll talk about them. I don't think it holds up as well as some of the others, like in The Invisible Man and Bride, all the ones directed by James Whale, but it holds up better than Dracula. I would say it even holds up maybe better than the original Frankenstein, but I don't know. We can talk about it, but there are some things pacing-wise and story-wise and character motivation and development-wise that I don't love, so we'll talk about it. Do you have any objections to getting this thing started?
Fuck no. Let's do it.
Well, Dylan is ready to go. You should all be ready to go. Come on, guys. It's day 7. The Wolfman, 1941. You all own it. You all have it memorized in your brain. You don't even need to watch the movie. We need to, because, that's the whole deal here. We have to, because otherwise this whole series would be a lie. We have to be watching it. Otherwise they're not commentaries, So, do whatever you see fit, though, because we're going to be pressing play in 3, 2, 1, play. Oh, didn't turn my audio down. So, where to begin with this thing?
The 40s Universal logo, so glitzy, so glamorous.
Yeah, very different from the one from the 30s. I remember this one better because one of the first Universal movies I saw was Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, and it's the same because that came out like a year later.
That actually was the first of these Universal monster movies that I actually saw like all the way through. Like I was aware of them culturally, but Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman was the first one that I got to watch because we found a VHS copy of it somewhere and insisted that my mother buy it for me.
Do not like this choice of having all the characters appear with the credits. It's way too TV show. Like, we're watching a movie. Come on, guys. I know this wasn't...
Show, but I think it also harkens back to, like, stage play type things. And a lot of early films borrow things from, like, stage productions that you wouldn't necessarily do now. Like, I've seen old movies where all the actors come out afterwards and take a bow. Like... There's all kinds of stage play things that people were playing with, maybe putting into movies early on. How many old movies have you seen that have like a forward, with like just some music while people come into the theater and sit down,
Oh yeah, I always skip that when they put that on the DVDs.
Stuff like that.
Yeah, no, I see what you mean. I think that this film is definitely influenced by like a stage drama type of story. For better and for worse.
I like that. I like that kind of thing better when it's like in the end credits, like after the movie, and then they say, "Here was this guy. He played this thing," and then you're like, "Okay, fine," you know.
In this
Because by
instance,
that
it's
point,
a little weird, though, because it's like, oh, we just saw Lawrence Talbot die, and now, oh, here's Lon Chaney, and he's fine, taking a bow. Woo. It's a little strange, not really apt. So, a few things. Prior to this, after they made Werewolf of London, Universal really wanted to have Boris Karloff star in a werewolf movie. They figured that was the way to make it a hit. And the script they had kicking around was inspired, like Werewolf of London was, more by stories of werewolves in the eastern part of the world. Eastern, Asia, where wolf children were being found in the wild, and that was the story they were going to do. And I believe Boris Karloff, I don't think he was going to actually be the werewolf, or if he was, he would be like the older version, but he would have been a child raised by wolves, or the werewolf would have been whoever would have played him. And he would have come to civilization later in life, kind of Tarzan style. And when he did, he would become a physical werewolf and kill people. But I also think that Boris Karloff may have actually been a priest who was sort of in guardianship of him and maybe not doing the most moral things by being his guardian. But I'm not sure. I don't know a lot of info about that script. Because Kurt Siodmak completely threw it out and refused to use any part of it when he actually sat down to work on his own version when they decided to go forward with the project. And what we have here is an amalgamation of a bunch of different stuff. But Kurt Siodmak himself, if you don't know, German, lots of German folks working on this here film. And the setting of it, as was sort of alluded to in the little entry in that book that we saw earlier, is Eastern Europe. We're supposed to be in Llanwelly. That's the name of the village. Apparently it's reported to be somewhere in Wales. But the idea was always supposed to be more Eastern Europe, so closer to your Germanic sort of influence. And Kurt Siodmak was somebody who escaped from the Nazis. And he purports that a great inspiration to him when he wrote this film was that the transformation of a man into a werewolf was a metaphor for him of the friends around him who he saw turn into monsters and kill their friends around them who are marked by a star. So, that's the sort of vague metaphor that he started with when he started crafting his own version of the werewolf. And
what's interesting about that is that it's always struck me that the quote-unquote pentagram that appears in Lawrence Talbot's hand in this film really looks more like a Star of David.
When I first started learning about World War II and the Holocaust and the Star of David that Jewish people had to wear in Germany and all other Nazi-controlled areas of the world, I was always like, oh, that's just like what's on the Wolfman. Why do they have the same symbol? That's kind of weird. But, then I realized that they have a different number of points, so that's obviously a thing. However, the visual similarity is definitely very striking. And, reporting by the original screenwriter, very intentional. I think, above all else, what comes out in the actual film is, in regards to the influence of that, is on the psychological conflict within Lawrence Talbot. Because he really goes through what can only be described as an existential crisis over the course of this film, and that's really what it's about. That's why, when you said earlier that it's got kind of a early film theater vibe going on, I think that this story lends itself more to that, because it really is about a man falling apart psychologically, and a smaller scale and a more intimate feel is more apt. And I think you could totally adapt this to the stage now and make it work. Don't you agree?
Probably. This might be the only hard thing to pull off, would be him looking through the telescope and seeing the girl in the window, but
that would be easy as hell now. I mean, you just spotlight her on the other side of the stage, and you just have him on the other side of the stage, and you just kind of have the audience imagine that they're looking at each other from a great distance.
Yeah, I suppose you could do it that way. I would never try to write a play because you have to. There's way more belief that you have to suspend in order to get an effect across on a stage than in a film because you can just show whatever you want in a film.
I mean,
Anyway,
production designers can get away with a lot more than you might expect, so you just have to kind of leave it up to them being clever.
but now what was the question?
Well, I mean, you sort of answered it. I mean, could this work on the stage? Probably.
Oh yeah, probably.
But it doesn't really matter, does it?
You wouldn't. I mean, you'd have to obviously do the transformation differently, but other than that, I think it could be done. I seem to remember, wasn't there a lot of debate early on about whether there would be an actual werewolf in the movie or if it would just be him going insane? Wasn't that an area of some discussion?
Kurt Siodmak's original script did not have any actual visual werewolf. It was all vague whether or not Lawrence Talbot, or originally his name was Larry Gill, was actually turning into a werewolf. He was originally just an American engineer who was hired by Lord Talbot to fix his telescope. He wasn't actually related to him. And then he gets... The same basic thing happens. He gets caught up in the lore of the werewolf, and he ends up getting bitten by one, or he gets bitten by a real wolf, as we see in this version as well. But, like I said, there's no transformation scenes, there's no him skulking around murdering people, and there's no makeup. It was just supposed to be all vague and psychological. And a lot of the psychological discussion and themes of that are still present in this version. There is just a supernatural explanation for it. So first things first, I actually think you could totally get away with having him not be related to Lord Talbot. That does add more emotion to it later when he starts kind of going crazy. But I still think that works and is sort of interesting in its own right, especially if you're going to do the take where he may or may not be crazy. But, would you have preferred that take, the more ambiguous take, or do you think this more overt monsterification of a man is more satisfying?
Ultimately, I think this just fits in better with the other Universal monster films, and for that reason, I'm glad that they went this direction. However, I would like to see that version done,
There's been hints of it in a million other things, but there's never been a straight up, like, we're going to do that version of the Wolfman ourselves. I would like to see it.
There is a similar idea in the film She-Wolf of London, which does not actually feature a she-wolf. But it's a little bit of a different situation in that one. This woman is actually this girl thinks that she's turning into a she-wolf and committing these crimes at night, when in reality her aunt is doing it and trying to convince her that she's a werewolf so that she'll get locked up and she can take the house.
Interesting.
But,
I've never seen that one. Let's talk about this since we're looking at it. Conceptually, I like the idea of him going after a girl who's already spoken for, but they have some kind of a connection and they sort of have a tragic romance. But Lon Chaney and Evelyn Ankers have zero chemistry, and that makes the whole thing not work at all, in my opinion. This whole bit's very awkward when he looks at her through the telescope and he comes in and he kind of forces his charms on her. I'm not saying Lon Chaney Jr. is not charming, but the way Evelyn Ankers is responding to it doesn't really play with his charm. There's just not enough to what brings them together for the tragedy of the romance later to really work. That's one of the things that was problematic for me going back to this recently, and why I think it unfortunately doesn't hold up as well as some of the other ones do. Because I just think that the relationship at the core of it just simply doesn't make as much sense. I don't know if I buy it. Do you buy Claude Rains? Another question of things. Do you buy Claude Rains as Lon Chaney Jr.'s father?
Sure, why not?
Both of his dads, on screen and in real life, played Phantom of the Opera.
Ah, that's true. Interesting. I have not thought of
Indeed.
Famously, Lon Chaney Sr. did not want Lon Chaney Jr. to be an actor.
Lon Chaney Sr. was dead by this point, long dead, correct?
Oh, yes. It was only after Lon Chaney Sr. Died that Larry, which isn't even his real name, I don't remember his actual name. Or not, fuck, not Larry.
Cranston.
Lon Chaney Jr. is not actually his name. He did that for...
Yeah, it's like Cranston Chaney or something.
Yeah, Crichton, I think.
We could look it up, but...
It was one of those things where it was like, you'll get more parts if you use your dad's name. And so eventually he caved in and did it.
Right.
Much to his... he did not want to do that, but, he did anyway, because he had to work. But anyway, it was only after Chaney Sr. died that he was able to pursue his dream of becoming an actor, because, again, Chaney famously did not want him to pursue the same career that he had pursued, and he, out of respect to that, he just didn't do it until the guy died.
And then he went on to appear in many things that he became iconic for. First of all, being Of Mice and Men, where he played Lenny alongside Burgess Meredith as the other guy, George. I remembered. I've read that book.
The youngest Burgess Meredith I have ever seen.
I should watch that movie because I like that book and I like those two actors.
I never had to read that book. Never seen any of the movies. But I
could never go back to that book now, but when I read it, I liked it.
I know the thrust of the story.
But this is the thing that really made him and put him on the map. And he went on to be in many, many, many other Universal monster movies. He played the most amount of Universal monsters himself. He played a variation on all of them, in fact, except like the creature from the Black Lagoon or the Invisible Man.
Yeah, but he's notable for having done all of the other ones, and it's easy to see why, because he's got a great physicality about him. He's a very, he's a tall man for the period. He's broad-shouldered. He's got a lot of mass, I suppose, which is an interesting reversal because from everything I read, he was a very sickly child.
Well, he's one of the only leads in one of these movies who's like the real starring man who is both the lead character and also the monster. He plays both roles. Because Boris Karloff, while the monster is largely the focus in those movies, Colin Clive is still he's our protagonist in a sense. He's our he's the guy we really kind of are following. But in this we have our actor filling both roles. By the way, we were just introduced to Bela Lugosi in this movie. He really wanted to play the Wolfman himself. We've talked about it before, he was dying for another bite at the apple to be an iconic monster again. And he does get to play a werewolf in this film, at least. Well, he doesn't get to actually be the werewolf, werewolfing around, but...
It's interesting that he gets to be the werewolf that instead of turning into a wolfman, turns into a German shepherd.
And then bites Lon Chaney and turns him into a proper wolfman.
I've always thought that maybe it was a matter of time. Maybe if Lon Chaney had lived longer, maybe the more he turned into a werewolf, the more dog-like he would be until eventually he would just be a German shepherd. That was just my fan theory to make it make sense in my head.
Interesting. Bela Lugosi is good in this for the little tiny bit that he is in it. He's cast here as Maria Uspenskaya's child. Maria Uspenskaya is Maliva, the gypsy woman who is all hip on the lingo about werewolves and shit. And
creatively named Bella.
And Bela Lugosi himself, is in fact only 6 years younger than Maria Uspenskaya. So the mother-son dynamic doesn't really work. But in other films that's worked as well, like in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Sean Connery is only 12 years older than Harrison Ford, so that's a little weird as well.
Well, it's fine, though, because really, for being mother and son, they're not on screen together much, if at all, are
No,
they?
not really. I mean, she goes to mourn at his grave later. I do like that he's not evil. He doesn't try to scare her. He's just like, please leave, because you will die.
Yes, yes. Even from the very start, when he's the werewolf, and then going on to Lon Chaney, the werewolf is characterized much more tragically than many of the other monsters.
Well-
Even I don't know. Probably about the same, really, as Frankenstein in terms of.
Yeah, that's why they
Just,
work well together, isn't it? And why they form a bit of a bond. They're both pursued, both hated,
Although
both
perhaps
both cursed by their dispositions.
Although perhaps it's even sadder with the Wolfman, because he actually starts off as a normal man and then becomes a thing rather than just being created a thing and then having to come to terms with it. It's a different ball game.
You can argue that he's sort of responsible for everything that happens here, because it was all his idea to go out in the first place, and he's, hanging out with this chick who's already spoken for, like I said before. So that's sort of, I guess, what you can argue for. How, like, oh, he should be cursed. Like, Frankenstein's monster is this innocent who's just given new life and then tortured and goes off and experiences the world under very bad pretenses. So I think you can argue both being less or more sympathetic than the other. However, what the Wolfman has over Frankenstein's monster is he has a psychology that we can really sink our teeth into, and is more complex and more difficult to really unravel, because he's a man of the world, and he was a fully developed person who's now really questioning that, now that he's been afflicted by this terrible predicament. In the new Wolfman, the actual proper remake with all the characters and stuff, the 2010 version, they go way further with the psychological stuff unraveling when he gets bitten by the werewolf.
And it gets even better in that regard in the sequels. The best parts about Frankenstein meets the Wolfman and House of Frankenstein are Lon Chaney bringing all this pathos to the role, because in this movie he's just now become the werewolf. He's discovering all these things. Those movies are all about him lamenting and wishing he could die, and it's fascinating stuff.
Right.
And I think that's the best thing to be said for Lon Chaney Jr. It would be he's not just some schmuck who gets to be in movies because his daddy was an actor. All right, he's not a Smith. He actually has the chops to back it up. He's a fantastic actor. It's not just all the physicality that I was speaking of before, but also just he is able to bring the personality as well. He really embodies the character.
Like I said, he is very charming, and he really plays the tortured thing well too. I think that's like you said, that's something that carried him through all his different movies. Is he played the psychological despair element of the Wolfman so well. You definitely empathize for him, and you relate to him for his alienation from the rest of the world by things that are outside of his control.
Well, and interestingly enough, that's one way that perhaps Of Mice and Men prepared him to play the Wolfman, because playing the frustration, and the sort of psychological, playing a simpleton. Perhaps that gave him some of the tools he would need to later on be a good Wolfman.
Now, I think that this movie is somewhat prototypey in that sense, in characterizing the werewolf as a victim and playing it more tragically and analyzing the psychological impact of it, because I just don't think we get to know enough about Lawrence Talbot. Or more than that, we don't get to see Lawrence Talbot do enough stuff to get a sense of who he is. I don't need a bunch of flashbacks and a complicated backstory like the 2010 version. I just need him to do stuff in the here and now that tells me who he is, and see him do things after that after the werewolf bites him that tell me that that's changing, and he needs to take steps to maintain his humanity and fight off the beast that is overcoming his humanity, which is what the whole Nazi metaphor was inspiring in the first place. So I just think that side of it is all really great in concept and a little faulty in execution. I always get the sense that Lawrence Talbot in this feels somewhat like a big kid, you know, you know, he sort of returns home to his childhood home where he was raised. He left because he didn't really see eye to eye with the lifestyle that his father wanted for him. His brother did, and you know, his brother was there to fill that role. Of course, his brother dies, and that's why he has to return. This version, I think maybe it was a hunting accident that killed him, something along those lines. In the 2010 version, it was a werewolf that got him. So, you know, it's more interconnected. In this, it's a random event that brings him here. I don't mind that. That's just a conceit to get him there, and he's already in the town by the time the film starts, so it's hardly noticeable. See, this is all really good because you're put in a situation where you know that you're not crazy, but everybody else has to think you're crazy, otherwise they'll think they're crazy, right?
Mm.
It's almost like the situation in Terminator, where Kyle Reese cannot possibly prove his story to anybody, because the means by which the time travel and the Terminator work makes it almost impossible for people who don't come from his time to really understand it. Same thing with being a werewolf in this world, where nobody really seems to believe in them as anything other than folklore, even though they are really a thing. You know, if you are bitten by a werewolf and you know for a fact that what you killed in the night was a wolf, and you were bitten by one, and, you know, everybody's telling you that you actually killed a person, mistakenly or otherwise, you know, it's hard to prove that he was a wolf, you know? Especially when, as we just saw, he doesn't really have a scar on his chest anymore. He has a little star, a little pentagram. So none of them really believe that he has, you know, animal injuries, that he was really mauled as he says he was. So all that's really good.
Yeah, that's some of the best stuff in.
Yeah, like I see, absolutely. And I think that was all largely intact from Kurt Siommak's original script, where there was no on-screen werewolf. And I think maybe that's the weak point of the film as well, is what the werewolf does isn't really all that great. You know, he kills one grave robber, he stalks a girl through the woods, and then Claude Rains beats the shit out of him in the dark. You know? And he's really stuck in that one foggy, you know, wood set. You know, in the next movie we see him go through a million different locations, but he is very limited here. And like I said, it's prototypey. A lot of the tropes start here with werewolves. Should we list them off now, since we're talking about it? What are some of the things that this version starts that a lot of other things have used later on? We said earlier that Werewolf of London started the whole the moon being the acting agent in the transformation thing.
Yes. Well, the connection between the werewolf and silver as a way of killing the werewolf comes from... That's actually something that was borrowed from vampire mythology.
Not true. In the Beast of Gaston legend, it was reported that a silver bullet was used to kill the werewolf in that legend. That was also reported to be like a real thing that happened. That was supposed to be a silver bullet that took it down. So Kurt Siommak apparently used that as an inspiration for in this film. But yeah, silver was more primarily associated with vampires before that. So if, you know, that story probably didn't actually happen, So that probably took it from vampire lore. So you're not wrong. I actually didn't know that until tonight. That story had a silver bullet in it as well. There was a huge documentary about that a few years back where they were like, did it really happen? Was there really a werewolf? And the realization was probably not. And if they used a silver bullet to kill it, it probably didn't work.
Yeah, the most useless documentary you could possibly have, because I could have told them that without them having to go through all that trouble.
There's an actual cop in it, and he doesn't seem very happy to be there.
I imagine not. Like, I have actual murders that I could be solving.
Mm-hmm. And there's a cryptozoologist who he's like teamed up with, and it makes for an interesting combination. So, unfortunately, the silver bullet thing also does not start here. But the full moon being the acting agent for the werewolf transformation actually comes from the sequel to this film, also written by Kurt Siodmak, Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, where you actually see the full moon rising, transforming Larry into the Wolfman. So that comes from the next film. However, what comes from this film is the poem that is at the beginning and is recited throughout as like the sort of, Cliff Notes version of what a werewolf is. Even a man who is pure at heart and says his prayers might by night may become a wolf when the wolfbane blooms and the autumn moon is bright. The moon is full and bright. Part would be added in the sequel. Again, the sequel made the full moon thing being the acting agent. But wolfbane being associated with transforming Larry into the Wolfman, I believe starts here. I don't know if Wolfbane in mythology was a part of werewolf lore, but it being an element of the poem, because the poem is a thing that Kurt Siodmak wrote himself, not a part of mythology itself, I would assume that they go hand in hand. I don't know if you know anything contrary.
No. The other problem, I've always had a slight problem with that anyway, because the connection between the Wolfbane and him is a little vague, and
it flip-flops sometimes. He can only transform when it's in bloom, but sometimes it's also it's a way to fend off werewolves.
Yeah, and that's something that I've seen used in other things later. The idea of using Wolfbane as a bit of a crucifix against werewolves.
In the next film, I'm sorry, I keep cutting you off.
As opposed to an agent for their transformation.
Yeah, in the next film, Larry's casket is filled with wolfsbane, so you would assume that it's also like supposed to ward them off. This is something I always hate in these old Universal monster movies, when there's just like a mob of people who are upset that somebody was like present at a murder, Like if somebody was there and they don't know exactly who did it or what exactly happened, they just suddenly blame them for everything. I just hate hysterical town people. I know we're supposed to, but I don't enjoy watching it. See, this is the other stuff I like. I like that we see him all pissed off and shit. We can see the wolfly elements of him coming out more. I wish there was more of it. Like I said, I just wish he went out and did more where we could see that. He does a lot of moping. And I think that works better in the subsequent films where he's been the werewolf for a longer period of time. He should be more. I feel like he should be more frantic at this point.
I like that the dad in this story is just like, they didn't go with the stereotypical like, you stay away from my daughter. You murdered that woman,
Yeah, I like that as well. I think that he gets that this guy was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and also that Gwen is able to take care of herself, and whatever relationship she has with this dude, it's not going to jeopardize her future or her relationship with the other guy who we have yet to meet, who she's actually betrothed to. This guy is a fucking tool, though, and we could do without him. I don't know if they needed to give Gwen a man that she's already invested in. It's an odd choice for a love interest, isn't it?
Yeah.
I guess it's there to give him more conflict.
Even though this wasn't a James Whale movie, I could very much imagine him making a version of this, because the whole thing that he just said, why does everybody insist that I'm confused, could also be used as a gay metaphor, and James Whale would be all on that.
Sure. And the werewolfism it would be a very different metaphor from the Nazi thing that seems to be the intention here. And overall, I think this is more sort of straight-laced than your James Whale monster movies. I feel like this is more serious in tone. There's comedic elements, to be sure, but they feel more like comic relief in an overall very serious drama. And I think, again, that's the thing that sets it apart. It's not so much gothic fantasy yet. There are certainly elements of that, but it's more grounded than Dracula or Frankenstein. Maybe even The Invisible Man. Like, The Invisible Man has the advantage of, like, The Invisible Man does more stuff in that than the Wolfman does in this. He goes off into the world and he fucking knocks trains off rails.
He goes gathering nuts in May.
Yeah. In this, the Wolfman walks through the forest.
In this, the Wolfman probably is a nut, and it might be May.
Yeah. I would have liked Boris Karloff to have made a cameo in this as well, since originally the idea was for this to be a star vehicle for him. I don't know which role you could have cast him. He may have been another interesting choice for Larry's father.
I was about to say, he might make a more convincing Larry's father, because he, similar to Lon Chaney Jr., is, very tall and kind of broad, and I think there would be a bit more of a resemblance. Whereas in this movie, it's like, I buy them being father and son, like, on an acting level. I think they sell it well, but on sheer looks,
Yeah, I agree. I also think that Claude Rains...
Larry's mother must have been a very large woman.
I think it's all about the intent of the character, though, because Sir John in this is supposed to be more of a... he's stern and set in his ways, but he's more understanding, he's more inquisical, he's, he looks through his telescope, he's interested in astronomy. He's supposed to be more open-minded, more warm than I think Boris Karloff would have played a character like this. If Karloff had been in mind for that particular character, you would write him to be a little more scary, maybe is the word, but more stern, more like, not so understanding of everything that goes on. Although when Larry starts to fall apart, Sir John is definitely not as understanding. So those parts I could definitely see Karloff doing.
Well, and if Karloff had been Larry's father, I could imagine Claude Rains still being in it. He could probably also be a fit for the psychiatrist character. I could see him doing that. And then,
sure.
You'd have them all in one movie. It would be fantastic.
So now she's finally warning him that he's, a werewolf. I don't think that he had put two and two together yet that he himself would become one. Was that part of the legend that Gwen and all the other people had told him earlier? Was that, if you're bitten by a werewolf, you yourself will become one?
No. See, that's the thing. The way the poem sounds, it seems as if anyone could spontaneously turn into a werewolf. When those conditions are met, the transference of the werewolf curse via bite really comes through Maria Uspinskaya here.
Right. I also like that she gives him a way seemingly to get out of this whole thing. Here's this charm. You'll be good. Just wear it. And he gives it away. to somebody who doesn't use it. That's something that is also carried in other versions in the 90s remake of this Wolf with Jack Nicholson, which is one of my other favorite remakes of this film. That's like a direct, like, oh, we're using this as source material. That's not as good as An American Werewolf in London, though. Different things. That has Jack Nicholson peeing on James Spader.
Now, the pentagram appearing in the hand, how common is that in other werewolf movies? I remember it being also in Alvin and the Chipmunks Meet the Wolfman for obvious reasons. But
the pentagram is the sign of the beast in American Werewolf in London. It's on the wall when they go to the bar, the slaughtered lamb. What's that star on the wall for? Everybody goes silent. Remember the Alamo. And then have you ever seen the 90s TV show Werewolf?
No.
80s or 90s? It's not great. Whenever the main character is going to transform into a werewolf, so whenever the moon is going to be full that night, he develops a pentagram on his hand that starts bleeding before he transforms.
Actually, I think in Alvin and the Chipmunks Meet the Wolfman, they changed it to some other, like a paw print or something, because they couldn't put a pentagram in a children's cartoon.
Right, because it's not strictly associated with werewolves. It's strictly associated with Satan.
Yeah.
You know? And werewolves, before Curtsioed Mac, were always associated with demons and Satanism and the occult. You know, subversive elements of society, witchcraft. When the Salem witch trials were going on, that was just an ever-growing extension of the witch trials and werewolf trials that had been going on in France and England, both prior and at the same time as they were in America. And this film is also sort of made in the vein of those real-life events, in that you have a man who's being ostracized by society and judged by society as something that he's not because of his disposition. Just like the supposed witches and werewolves that were burned at the time. The original werewolf lore, as you may have known it, is that you would put a belt on and you would rub some oil on yourself, and then the devil would transform you, and you would need a pentagram, and then you would transform into a werewolf, and you'd be able to do whatever you were going to do and pay your debt to Satan. So a few things in rapid succession here before we lose them. There was supposed to be a bear that got loose in this scene, and Lawrence Talbot was supposed to fight it. But the bear escaped during filming, and there wasn't enough footage of it to use, so they had to scrap the scene. Did you know that?
No, I'm glad.
It was actually referenced in the new one. I'm pretty sure. I can't remember the exact details of the scene, but I'm sure it was. That hallucination bit was also not in the original film. Because I think... I'm sorry, the original script... Because I think the idea there is supposed to be that's what a werewolf sees before he picks his victim and before he goes after them as the werewolf, which is about to happen. You know, and originally it was supposed to be more vague that he was turning into the werewolf. But if you're going to do a more psychological take, I think having a trip out is essential. You were going to say something, though. And I've just said a bunch of things, so I think you should talk now.
No, I was just going to ask you, how did did Benicio del Toro fight a bear?
There was a bear in the gypsy camp, and I'm pretty sure it escaped when... Because in that version, there was an actual werewolf that had transformed and was... I mean, Anthony Hopkins was attacking the camp, and I'm pretty sure a bear got out and attacked and killed somebody in that movie. We will have to go back and confirm that at some point, but I'm pretty sure that happened. Another super prototypey thing that doesn't hold up about this version is the way the transformation is shot and the way it's shown. It doesn't make any sense. What he's wearing here, you know, he's wearing this wife beater. We're going to see his feet transform. This has been made fun of several times, you know. Just cutting to the feet and showing those change. Although, I do like this sequence of shots. But the transformation in Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman is the one that's really iconic. And I like the way he walks on his feet. But you see, his outfit has completely changed now that he's out in the woods.
And whether he doesn't just walk flat-footed, because it's actually more true to you know, how a canine leg works.
Yeah, like I said, I think that's cool. But I also don't think it's that cool that the werewolf, like, changes his attire before he left the room.
Well, you know, you don't want to run out in just a wife beater. I mean, even the Wolfman has more class than that.
I like that he's killing a guy who's digging a grave. You know, because it's like, oh, a guy who's putting the dead to rest. And here we have a werewolf who is making rest for the dead difficult because of his unnatural means of ripping souls from this plane, which is the way how it's always seen.
I wish the hair was perhaps a bit longer. It doesn't so much evoke wolf to me as it does like Shih Tzu, you know.
It's a very like primate sort of werewolf, isn't it? It's more the man than the wolf. This has always been my favorite design, though. Like, if I think of a werewolf in my head, this and an American Werewolf in London are the two extremes that I sort of think of.
I'm quite fond of the werewolf in Silver Bullet. I've heard a lot of people say that the effects in that movie aren't great. And, you know, the transformation isn't. But the werewolf itself looks pretty good, I think.
Another werewolf I always loved was the one in Bad Moon. That's a TV movie. Great effects in that. That murder scene was better than I remembered, but still not great. You could have done better. Another German on the production of this was the director, George Wagner.
Any relation to Kurt Wagner?
Being that one of them is a fictional character, I doubt it, but you never know. This was another thing that was retained from the original script with the vague werewolfism. Although that would make it less vague.
That paw print was kind of small to have come from him.
Right, well, I think that's why it's more in line with the original script, where if he was becoming a werewolf, he would just be a wolf. At least when he changed back, he's in the proper outfit again. Like the same one we just saw him in.
Yeah.
Oh my god, my sense of style has suddenly improved. My tit hurts, though.
Well, you know, werewolf cares enough to put something on before leaving the house, but not so much taking it off before going back to bed. By that point, he just doesn't give a fuck anymore.
Doesn't even get under the covers.
He's like, I'll let this asshole figure that out.
I also like that at this point, even if they're going to think that he's crazy for his actions and his mindset, he doesn't want them to think that he is a werewolf with the little evidence that is there, because, they'll know that he's responsible for the killings, which I think makes him a little more morally ambiguous for the better, for the better of the narrative. Because realistically, he should, turn himself in, get himself locked up or whatever, because he's dangerous and he's killing people, and he knows that for a fact now. But he's scared, and he feels alone and isolated, and he doesn't know what to do, and I think that he's definitely relatable. This is perhaps the best Definitely one of the better, though, internal conflicts for a character in one of these classic Universal monster movies. I think we feel more in Lawrence Talbot's head than we do a lot of these other characters because we just don't get to spend enough time with them in these super short old monster movies. Him and the Invisible Man, I think we get more in the head of than any others. Interesting that they're father and son in this film. This is another really solid dialogue sequence where we have some discussion about themes.
Well, another interesting segue from this movie is that in the Claude Rains version of Phantom of the Opera, we also get a pretty good look into his psyche. It takes a little bit more of this movie's approach with him, in that we see him. There's an origin story for his disfigurement in that movie. He isn't born disfigured, and so it's a bit more of a downward spiral, similar to what Lawrence is going through here. I don't particularly care for the changes that they made to the character in that version, but it is certainly more psychological.
It's more complex backstory than what we're getting here, though, which is more in the moment. A man, coming to grips with his limitations of being a man and his primal urges coming to the floor. He was just talking about how, give him anything with tools and wires and stuff and he can figure it out, but all this stuff in your head that you can't even figure out, all these ideas of morality, these things that you can't touch, they're totally unworkable and beyond him, and they terrify him that he can't do anything about it. And I think that that's another thing that makes him relatable. He's this very practical guy who's been in America for the past 18 years. And here he comes back to dark, stuck in the past Eastern Europe where he comes from. And they're drawing him in with all these dark fantasies. And he's not sure whether or not to believe them or not. And whether or not he's being caught up in it because he's ignorant of it. Or if everybody else is ignorant of just how real it is, and he's the only one who realizes it. So, I love all that. That's all awesome. I think that's all good stuff. Although, every other character in this movie is an idiot, right? And I mean, I buy that they wouldn't believe that werewolves are real or whatever, but they should definitely be connecting the dots more quickly. Because the fact that Larry says that he kills a wolf, it turns out to be a dude, and then the very next night there's clear evidence that a wolf has been killing people. The coincidences there are too much to overlook.
No, but I think most rational people, though, even if they do connect those dots, would then quickly dismiss that conclusion as nonsense.
Well, you would at least have to assume that Larry saw the wolf that is now killing people the night prior. And you would maybe have to question whether or not he was actually in a physical confrontation with it.
Mm-hmm. Yes, perhaps.
That conversation should have been had at the very least.
But the fact that his wound that he attests to having disappeared sheds doubt on that as well.
Yeah, you're right. This is some of the more strangely gothic imagery we get in the film. The more exaggerated light coming down from the church. And this is also a great bit where he comes in and everybody just stares at him. Again, he just feels super ostracized and isolated from everybody. Can you believe we're 19 minutes away from the end of this one?
Yeah, these Universal Monster movies are pretty short.
They fly by.
He still has another conversation to have with Maria Ouspenskaya, though, doesn't he?
He does. I'm starting to think.
But yeah, that's crazy to think about, because these days, I don't even think you're considered a full feature unless you're at least 90 minutes, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's a movie. This is an hour and 9. This was on a double bill, though, so that's why. Oh, fuck, there is another major element of this film's release that we have yet to discuss, and we're so close to the end. This came out very, very near to the Attack on Pearl Harbor. And due to that, Universal changed some things about it when they were in production. Initially, it was supposed to be a little gorier. They cut down on the gore. This was also supposed to be on a double bill with another horror movie. They changed that because they thought that 2 horror movies in a row would be too much for people at the time. In the shadow of Pearl Harbor. So it was put on a double bill with some other movie that wasn't a horror movie. And all in all, the climate of filmmaking at the time was a lot more reserved and conservative than it was when the Universal Classic monsters began their heyday in the 30s. People were more, terrified of what was beyond the Atlantic Ocean, and beyond the Pacific Ocean in particular. And a monster from Eastern Europe definitely was pressing the wrong buttons. But it pressed the right buttons for the box office, much to Universal's surprise, as it was a huge hit. And it was only on a budget of $180,000. By the way, that's a lot small. That's a lot smaller than a lot of the earlier ones.
I wonder if it may be unintentionally based on Kurt Siogmak's, inspiration for the intended message of the piece. But I wonder if it unintentionally played into some American xenophobia in the wake of Pearl Harbor, because here you have this story about an American man who goes to a foreign country and just nothing goes well for him afterwards. I mean, sure, he's supposed to be originally from here, but come on, he's American. And he goes to this other country, and it's all downhill.
Well, that's the whole point, is he goes there and he maybe or maybe doesn't get bamboozled by the folklore, or at the very least gets drawn into it for the worse. So yeah, without a doubt. And it's again, like the Nazi metaphor is inherent in the writing stage, so definitely.
It's interesting. When you lay the plot out like that, American man goes to foreign country, terrible things happen. It's like 1941 Hostel, which is interesting because I can't think of a horror movie further away from this than Hostel. But there you go.
This is certainly regarded as one of the greatest horror classics of all time. What elements of it do you think have stood the test of time to give it that reputation?
I feel like it's one of the better of the Universal of all these on the scale of just the writing itself is pretty strong. That I think has something to do with it. I think Lawrence, I keep calling him by his character name. I think Lon Chaney's performance is another big part of that. I think he sells the tragedy here. And even, and again, Boris Karloff had done that before with Frankenstein, but this is much more relatable because he starts out as like a normal dude. I think it's a bunch of elements such as that sort of.
I really think that victim approach to his character was one of the major things that has made it so iconic. Because again, it was unique at the time, and it's one of the better elements of the story here that makes it effective. And it's a good approach for a horror film to have a victim of the monster be everybody, including the monster. Aesthetically, though, I think we can also agree the makeup and the atmosphere of the sets have also gone a long way to making this super iconic.
Yeah, along with The Mummy, I think this is Jack Pierce's other best piece of work.
I mean, the Frankenstein monster, and The Mummy, they distinctly have their unique personalities, and they distinctly work for their distinct monsters. And I just think that that's awesome. And, credit is due to Jack Pierce for a lot of the way we look at these monsters now because of how they were originally designed. This is a weird bit. He turns back into a man just because he got caught in a bear trap. That's bizarre.
Well, no, I think the idea is more that she turned him back into a human with that gypsy chant she was just doing. She's a bit more than a regular gypsy. She's a bit witchish. Witchy? Whatever.
That saying
witch-like.
that she just said, the path you walked was thorny. She was...
It's the thing. It's the same thing she said at Bella's grave. Have we
Yeah.
actually done that? Have we? I guess I just talked right through that scene. I didn't even notice it was happening because I don't remember it.
Yeah. So that de-werewolfies someone. I guess that makes sense. She says it at Bella's tomb, so maybe she's doing that so that way he'll rest in peace and not be a werewolf when he's, dead, and maybe he won't return as a walking corpse. But she does that for Larry at the end of this film as well, and in the sequel, he does get resurrected after he's been killed as a werewolf, so she's a fucking failure.
Fucking bitch. No,
I love how he's like, yep, I'm out looking for werewolves, barefoot, without a jacket, or a gun, or a hat, or any way to find or kill a werewolf. Or a normal
lantern.
or a normal wolf, or whatever the hell we're looking for.
Or a dog.
This film also really, kicked up the fog in these movies. Like, Dracula had a lot of fog, but this film really, the whole foggy forest thing really starts here.
This movie's got almost as much fog as John Carpenter's The Fog, and that's a lot of fog.
That is an innumerable amount of fog. And again, I think that's another thing that's just made it so iconic. Danny Elfman's Batman score harkens back to this a little bit. The love theme between Gwen and Larry is sort of in Batman 89, and some of the music here that's more subtle and more brooding in the background while Larry's walking around barefoot sounds a bit like some of the brooding music in Batman 89. Batman 89 had a lot of Universal monster influence in the design of it. Batman was supposed to be a lot more of a classic Universal monsterish kind of character than he was a superhero in that version.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of influence from these films in that.
Well, I mean, Jack Nicholson's makeup, well, obviously because, the character of the Joker was inspired by this anyway, but it really harkens back to the silent film The Man Who Laughs as well.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that just conceptually
always-
the Joker was always based on that.
I always noticed the similarity there in the score. It's kind of striking. As a person who grew up with Batman 89 long before I finally got around to seeing this film, it hit me right away.
Indeed.
It's kind of similar, although in this case it was more intentional. In Halloween H2O, there's a moment where Jamie Lee Curtis interacts with Janet Leigh, and when Janet Leigh gets back in her car, they play like Marion's music from Psycho.
I don't remember that moment, but cool.
It goes by really quickly, and it's kind of like an updated version of it's a blink and you'll miss it kind of reference. But once you notice it, it's super obvious.
I like that he went to her and they had a little more chemistry in this bit. She genuinely wants to help him and thinks that he's in a bad spot. But now he knows that she's the next victim. So I feel like now that it's become personal, somebody who he really cares about is going to be the next victim of the werewolf. He now really wants to step up and do something about it. So now he's going to his dad with all the info that he thinks he has. He's desperate. I really love Claude Rains' reaction as well. I think it's very natural, and it's something that I remembered a lot when I first saw this. Because he does humor him a bit and try to help him through it, despite being like super stern and stalwart about the whole thing, which I think still like works really well.
Did you like the decision in the remake to make Anthony Hopkins like actually evil and to have him also be a werewolf?
I didn't like that they made him a werewolf because I thought that just came off as really campy at the end. But I liked the idea of making him evil, or at least morally bereft in some areas. Maybe an abusive father. All those elements I thought were good conceptually. Just an execution, that film just comes off as more campy than I think it intends to, than serious drama.
There is perhaps an element of that in the Claude Rains version as well. I think he's very stern. He cares, but he's very stern, and perhaps that sternness could be unintentionally harmful in a psychological way.
Right. But he genuinely thinks that his son's going absolutely insane. You know?
Yeah, and you can't. From where he's looking, it certainly seems that way.
Right. So I give him a lot more credit, and I think that he's a lot warmer than he may have come across had you had a Boris Karloff in this role. You know? And he comes off as a lot more understanding than any other actor maybe could have pulled it off. Claude Rains just has such a knack for being likable, yet also scary at the same time, that he's just I think he was the best choice, even more than Karloff from the writing perspective. I do wonder what made them finally go, all right, Lon Chaney Jr., you're going to be the Wolfman. Had he been a Universal monster prior to this? I'm pretty sure Ghost of Frankenstein is before this.
No, it's actually the year after.
Oh, is it? So this is his first Universal monster movie?
I believe so, yeah.
I wonder what made them finally give him a shot. He is marketed as simply Lon Chaney, so I wonder if it was just the familial connection.
Perhaps. I feel like there's a story here that I'm just not remembering from like the special features on the Blu-ray.
Yeah, I tried to look stuff up about that particular element, and I couldn't find anything that was specific, and I couldn't remember anything from what I had always seen when I was a kid as well. Oh, one thing we forgot to mention earlier, that German Shepherd that was playing the wolf that Bela turned into, that dog was a former police dog. He and Lon Chaney Jr. had an instant connection on set, and Lon Chaney Jr. took him home as his actual dog after the film was done. I forget what his name was. But Lon Chaney Jr. has always had a huge affinity for this film and this role. He's described the Wolfman as his baby, you know?
Yeah.
You know, his proudest achievement.
It is certainly his most memorable for most people. I'm a tad more fond of
it's this and the
crazy.
Alligator People, right?
Yeah, I'm a bit fond of crazy Lon Chaney from Alligator People.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, the Frankenstein meets the Wolfman is my favorite, you know, film with this character in it. In terms of like what happens to him.
I think he has the best stuff to do in that movie because again he
does more stuff.
He's no longer coming to grips with being a werewolf, so he knows he's a werewolf. He's accepted it and he's lamenting over it. It's just plus he's just recently been resurrected from the grave, so you've got that whole element in there. It's his best stuff. The House of Frankenstein has that too, but the problem there is that they're just rehashing the stuff he had in Frankenstein.
His arc is the best part of that movie, though.
Definitely. It certainly isn't Mustache Dracula.
No. Or Frankenstein falling in some quicksand.
Oh, yeah, that's right. That happened.
That did happen. I saw it. You can't take it away from me.
I can try.
Oh, boy. I love how everybody just runs into the woods to look for this supposed werewolf, you know? Like, whether or not they believe he's transformed into a monster or not, they know he's skulking in the woods somewhere. I just think that that's ridiculous.
That's true. I wonder if this was the inspiration for that hilarious scene in Silver Bullet when all the townsfolk go off into the woods to look for the werewolf. And
definitely visually, now that you bring it up, because the fog is a huge part of that. Oh my god, one thing we should also talk about, you know, we talked about how the score was influential before, but the score is just also hugely iconic. Like, my god, this part in particular is so good. it's been reused in a million other movies, including King Kong versus Godzilla. So maybe that's also why I'm particularly partial to it.
We've come a long way from 1931 when Dracula had no score to speak of. These films have been growing more of a score as they've gone along, and this is the most comprehensive and one of the best.
No doubt.
This and Bride and Creature from the Black Lagoon probably have the best.
Yeah, I think it's this and Creature for me in terms of score. This bit is also pretty on point. I think that the image of Claude Rains beating down the Wolfman with his son's own cane is just 10 times more striking than when Lon Chaney did it to a German Shepherd before. They're doing a good job of mirroring the two sequences, though, having it happen behind a tree, sort of obscuring what exactly Claude Rains is seeing happen himself.
Yeah. Fun fact: after beating that German Shepherd with a cane, Lon Chaney would later come to own that German Shepherd.
I said that before.
Did you?
I did.
I wasn't paying attention.
Thank you. Thematically, I also like that Claude Rains puts his son out of his misery and sort of takes responsibility for his son's atrocities by, taking him down himself. He'll go on to die of grief after this, as is stated in the sequel. And I just think that that's another, dark thematic part of the horror that's more psychological in nature than just, oh my God, I'm being killed by a monster. There's more to that, more pathos to it. So I just think that that's also good. I love how Maliva's like, yep, well now you can deal with your dead son. Good luck. I'm gonna take my cart that could easily carry the body and go to greener pastures.
I had to deal with my dead kid.
Yeah, so now it's your turn, Claude Rains. Boo-ha-ha-ha. I'll definitely never come back in another sequel.
It would have been an interesting twist is if he hadn't become a werewolf through being bitten by Bela Lugosi, but if instead she had somehow turned him into one as revenge for what happened to her son, and all throughout the movie she had been guiding him towards being killed by his death.
That's brilliant. Yeah, that would have been great. But unfortunately, they didn't take that route, and that is the end of the film. Yes, a lot better paced than I remembered. I actually enjoyed it more this time than I did the last time. I think it holds up better than I remembered it.
It's one of the best, man. It's
the
probably the best one. Well, no,
I don't think it's as good as Bride or the Invisible Man.
I was going to say in the 40s, probably this and Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman.
Yeah. I think it's more prototypey than Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman. That has some more iconic elements to it. But the psychological elements are really strong, despite how early they are in their, exploration of those notions and how successful they are at it. But it definitely works at setting a mood and setting out and succeeding at what it set out to do of delivering a personal, horrific experience from the point of view of a character who's becoming a monster himself and dealing with the repercussions of it. So it definitely deserves the iconic status it has, and it's one that'll always be well remembered by yours truly.
Yeah. Yes. Well, that was Lon Chaney Jr. in 1941's The Wolfman. Just trying to make you understand that he's more wolf than a man, or he's more man than a wolf.
Definitely more man than wolf in the design. That was done for budget reasons, by the way. So this one is a big deal because it is the first of these that really shows a change in era and a change in sort of mindset of the audience and of the studio and how to make these things. And at this point, Universal has more control over the productions, and there's a lot more penny pinching going on behind the scenes than in the early days.
Yeah, I like to I like to compare it to Dracula a lot because it's 31, 41. It's exactly 10 years later. It's a nice barometer of how the movies had changed, and
they're definitely both like the iconic ones that set off their own eras.
it's so much more modern. It's by leaps and bounds closer to something that would come out today than Dracula is, and it's amazing that happened over the course of just 10 years. And I think it all just comes down to, as I discussed in depth when we did our Dracula commentary, it just comes down to the fact that talkies were new then and they didn't know what the fuck they were doing, and by the time 41 rolls around, they've got a much better idea of how to make one of these movies.
I mean, think about it. This is the same year as Citizen Kane, so cinema is at a more advanced stage, and audiences are at a more advanced stage at this point. Although Citizen Kane bombed when it first came out, so not in that regard.
Yeah.
But
I wonder what awful movie they put on the double bill with this.
I have no idea. That's the one thing I didn't get to look up.
That's the problem with double bills. I understand the concept of the double bill. Twice as much movie for your buck. Not really though, because the movies are shorter. It's not really a common practice anymore. But there's a drive-in theater near here that they always do double bills with movies. And I remember back when I still gave a shit about the Harry Potter movies, I went to see Harry Potter 5, and I had to sit through Ratatouille first.
Oh.
I was not a happy camper. Not that Ratatouille is a bad movie, just not my bag, and not what I was there for.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree with you. It's an archaic way to view movies. I mean, when they do it, it's like it's a marathon of things in the same franchise. Fine. And that's always cool. But yeah, the arbitrary, like, well, these two things are similarly, the runtimes are similar enough that we can throw them together, so that'll work. It doesn't work.
I definitely go to a back-to-back showing of something like, I don't know, Kill Bill Volumes 1 and 2, or I don't know, like Halloween 1 and 2, or
Jingle All the Way 1 and 2. Sure.
Jingle All the Way. Oh, no. No. I'd go to a Lord of the Rings triple feature and sit in a chair for 10 hours. Why not?
I would love to watch The Room and then watch The Disaster Artist as a double bill. I hope that's an available option when that movie finally comes out.
That would be interesting. I'd like to watch An Adventure in Space and Time, followed by An Unearthly Child.
Yeah, that would be also trippy. But all these things are things we can do in the future, Dylan, after we complete Commentaries of the Night, which is going to be sooner rather than later, as in next time, because next time we jump another full decade and conclude this little spooky romp. What film will mark that event, though, D?
Well, I know we just skipped to the 40s, but we're time traveling again to 1954. We're Doctor Who in this motherfucker, as we check out the creature from the Black Lagoon.
Indeed. Another huge one from my childhood, but all of that and many more things will be said when we delve into the murky waters of the Amazon tomorrow. Fucking sooner rather than later, like I said. So, until then, I'm Bill Worster, aka Zazubaar.
And I'm Super DM64.
It's at night. We commentated on a movie. We met up to your expectations. Boo!